Dr. Ethan Reeves stood in the corridor of the Concordia, staring at the door panel that displayed his quarters assignment with the kind of expression usually reserved for discovering your coffee mug has developed sentience and filed a complaint with HR. The glowing digits read, Diplomatic Suite 7 Alpha, which according to his hastily downloaded orientation materials was supposed to house single-occupancy research personnel with standard atmospheric requirements and moderate social anxiety. Aria, he addressed the ship's AI through his comm implant, I think there's been some kind of mistake with my room assignment. No mistake detected, Dr. Reeves, came the pleasantly synthetic voice that somehow managed to sound both helpful and completely unhelpful simultaneously. Your request for intimate linguistic immersion with primary diplomatic subject has been processed and accommodated. Ethan's face went through several interesting color variations. I think there's been a translation error. When I said intimate linguistic immersion, I meant close study of language patterns, not. He gestured vaguely at the door. Whatever this is going to turn out to be. Translation accuracy stands at 99.7%. Enjoy your stay. The door chimed softly and slid open before he could argue further, revealing a space that looked like someone had asked an interior designer to create, luxury hotel room meets spaceship meets potential diplomatic incident. The main living area featured two distinct seating arrangements that seemed to be engaged in a polite territorial dispute, with Earth-style furniture on one side facing off against what appeared to be Etherian equivalents that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. And sitting in one of those organic-looking chairs, reading what appeared to be a leather-bound book with the kind of intense concentration usually reserved for defusing bombs, was quite possibly the most beautiful woman Ethan had ever seen. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders. Her skin had a subtle luminescence that seemed to come from within, and when she looked up at his entrance, her eyes held the kind of ancient wisdom that made him immediately want to apologize for every stupid thing he'd ever done or might do in the future. The only thing that marked her as definitively non-human were her ears, which rose to elegant points that would have made any fantasy enthusiast weep with joy. You must be the human, she said, her voice carrying an accent that sounded like honey mixed with starlight. I am Queen Lyralii of the Etherian Empire. I assume you're here to explain why my diplomatic quarters now apparently come with a roommate. Ethan's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. I'm Dr. Ethan Reeves, xenolinguist, and I'm really, really sorry about whatever bureaucratic nightmare has led to this situation. I can find somewhere else to sleep. Maybe the maintenance bay. Or an airlock. I hear the views are spectacular right before you die. Lyralii's lips curved into what might have been amusement. How charmingly dramatic. Tell me, Dr. Reeves, do all humans apologize for things that haven't happened yet, or is this a personal quirk? It's more of a survival strategy, Ethan said, finally stepping fully into the room as the door sealed behind him with a soft hiss that sounded suspiciously like cosmic laughter. I've found that preemptive apologies can sometimes prevent major diplomatic incidents. And how often does this strategy work? Well, I haven't started any wars yet, so I'm calling it a qualified success. Lyralii set down her book, which Ethan now realized was an actual paper book, not a digital reader. Fascinating. You carry physical books on interstellar vessels? It's a collection of Earth literature. Helps me remember home when I'm surrounded by technology that's smarter than I am. He paused. Which, to be fair, includes most of the bathroom fixtures on this ship. Your bathroom fixtures are sentient. I'm not entirely sure, but the shower definitely has opinions about water temperature, and I swear the mirror judges my morning appearance. This time Lyralii's smile was unmistakable. Your species has an interesting relationship with your technology. We like to think we're in charge, but mostly we just hope it doesn't become self-aware and realize how much we depend on it. Ethan set down his travel bag with the careful movements of someone trying not to disturb a potentially dangerous situation. Look, Your Majesty, I really should contact the diplomatic corps and get this sorted out. I'm sure they can find me other accommodations. Actually, Lyralii said, standing with a fluid grace that made Ethan briefly wonder if Etherians were subject to the same gravitational laws as everyone else, I find myself curious about this arrangement. Your species fascinates me, Dr. Reeves. You apologize constantly, you anthropomorphize your technology, and apparently you travel through space carrying dead trees processed into communication medium. When you put it like that, we do sound pretty weird. Weird is not the word I would use. Complex, perhaps. Unpredictable. She moved to examine his travel bag with the kind of scientific interest usually reserved for particularly interesting specimens. I have been studying human diplomatic protocols for months in preparation for these negotiations, but I find the theoretical knowledge quite different from practical observation. Ethan watched her circle around him like he was an exhibit in a museum. I hate to break it to you, but I'm probably not the best example of human diplomatic protocols. I once accidentally started a trade war with the Centauri Republic because I used the wrong verb tense when ordering coffee. You started a war over coffee? It was really good coffee. And to be fair, the war only lasted about 6 hours before everyone realized how ridiculous it was. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit that had served him poorly through most of his academic career. The point is, if you're looking for diplomatic insight, you might want to request someone who doesn't have a track record of turning routine interactions into interstellar incidents. Lyralii had stopped circling and was now studying his face with the intensity of someone reading a particularly challenging text. Dr. Reeves, how long is your assignment aboard this vessel? 6 months, assuming I don't accidentally cause another war or get ejected from an airlock for crimes against diplomacy. And you intended to spend this time studying Etherian language patterns? That was the plan. Immersive study, cultural observation, maybe finally figuring out why your past tense conjugations seem to exist in 17 different dimensions. 17 is close. It's actually 23, but 3 of them can only be accessed during lunar eclipses, and 2 more require a fundamental understanding of quantum poetry. Ethan stared at her. Quantum poetry is a real thing. Of course. How else would you describe the intersection of probability waves and emotional resonance? I, honestly have no idea how to respond to that. Most humans don't. It's quite refreshing. Lyralii moved to what appeared to be a control panel built into the wall, her long fingers dancing across symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves as she touched them. I believe this living arrangement could prove mutually beneficial, Dr. Reeves. You wish to study Etherian culture and language. I wish to understand human behavioral patterns. Cohabitation would provide optimal research conditions for both of us. The room's lighting shifted to a warmer tone, and Ethan realized that what he'd taken for standard atmospheric controls were actually some kind of advanced environmental system that responded to Etherian biometrics. You want to keep sharing the room? Unless you find the prospect objectionable. Ethan looked around the luxurious space, then at Lyralii, who was watching him with the expression of someone who found the entire situation mildly entertaining rather than diplomatically catastrophic. Well, when you put it in terms of mutual research benefit. Excellent. Then we are agreed. She returned to her chair and picked up her book. I should mention that Etherians require approximately 4 hours less sleep than humans, and our circadian rhythms operate on a 27-hour cycle rather than your 24. That's, actually incredibly useful information for my research. Also, we tend to regulate body temperature through shared thermal fields when sleeping, which your species might find unusual. Ethan's brain took a moment to process this. Shared thermal fields. Nothing inappropriate, Dr. Reeves. Simply more efficient than individual temperature control. Though I suppose we could request separate sleeping pods if you prefer. No, it's fine. When in Rome, right? Or when in space with alien royalty, adapt to alien royalty customs. Lyralii looked up from her book again. You have a saying about Rome? It means when you're in a foreign place, you should follow local customs. Ah. We have a similar expression, when among the star singers, learn to harmonize or risk being ejected into the cosmic void. That's considerably more dramatic than our version. We're a dramatic people, Dr. Reeves. You'll find that most of our customs involve either quantum mechanics or the possibility of being launched into space. Good to know. I'll try to keep that in mind during my research. Lyralii smiled, and Ethan had the distinct feeling that his 6-month assignment had just become significantly more complicated than he'd anticipated. 3 weeks into what Ethan had started calling the most educational diplomatic accident in human history, he'd learned several important things about living with alien royalty. First, Etherians apparently considered breakfast conversation incomplete without at least one reference to the thermodynamic properties of toast. Second, Lyralii read approximately 47 books per week, and somehow managed to make insightful comments about each one while simultaneously monitoring what appeared to be 17 different holographic data streams. Third, and most surprisingly, the Queen of the Etherian Empire had developed an inexplicable fondness for his collection of terrible Earth sitcoms. I still don't understand why the human Ross doesn't simply communicate his feelings directly, Lyralii said, pausing the holographic display that was currently showing a 21st century comedy series. Your species has developed faster than light travel, but you still consider emotional honesty to be more terrifying than navigating a black hole. Ethan looked up from his morning coffee, which the ship's replicator had finally learned to make without adding what tasted suspiciously like motor oil. To be fair, black holes follow predictable physical laws. Human emotions are basically chaos theory with feelings. Chaos theory suggests that complex systems have underlying patterns. Are you saying human emotions follow mathematical principles? I'm saying human emotions make quantum mechanics look like basic arithmetic. He gestured at the frozen hologram showing Ross mid-gesture, apparently explaining something badly to Rachel. Ross there is demonstrating what we call the principle of maximum romantic inefficiency, where the most straightforward path to happiness is avoided in favor of elaborate misunderstandings. Lyralii tilted her head, her pointed ears catching the morning light in a way that Ethan had definitely not been noticing for the past 3 weeks. This is considered entertainment. We find comfort in watching other people make worse decisions than we do. Fascinating. Etherians prefer entertainment that demonstrates optimal decision-making and efficient problem resolution. That sounds incredibly boring. Most of our comedy involves mathematical proofs delivered with impeccable timing. Ethan paused with his coffee halfway to his lips. You're joking. Actually, yes. That was an attempt at human-style humor. How did I do? Well, you had me going for a minute there, so I'd say pretty well. He set down his mug and turned to face her fully. Speaking of communication, I've been meaning to ask you something. Ask. How long do Etherians usually sleep? Because for the past week, you've been getting up at what I can only describe as astronomical dawn, and you still look like you could wrestle a supernova and win. Lyralii's expression shifted slightly, and for a moment Ethan caught something that looked almost vulnerable before she smoothed it away. Etherians require less sleep than humans, as I mentioned. That's not really an answer. It's a diplomatically accurate answer. Lyralii. He'd started using her name instead of her title about 2 weeks ago, after she'd pointed out that formal address was unnecessarily exhausting when one shares thermal regulation space. What aren't you telling me? She stood and moved to the large viewport that dominated one wall of their shared quarters, her hands clasped behind her back in what Ethan had learned was her thinking pose. My planet has binary suns, Dr. Reeves. True darkness is rare, occurring only during specific orbital alignments that happen perhaps once every few months. Okay, that explains the light sensitivity controls you installed. Ethan joined her at the viewport, where the star field wheeled slowly past as the Concordia maintained its diplomatic course. You're clean, you don't leave dishes in the thermal cycler, and your book recommendations have been excellent. I am pleased that my literary suggestions meet with your approval. Though I have to ask, where did you get a physical copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in what appears to be the original English? I may have specifically requested it from the ship's cultural archives when I learned you enjoyed absurdist humor. Ethan stared at her. You researched my reading preferences. I researched many aspects of human cultural preferences. For diplomatic purposes. Right. Diplomatic purposes. He was quiet for a moment, processing this. Can I make a suggestion? Of course. Tonight, instead of pretending you need exactly 4 hours less sleep than humans, why don't we try something different? Maybe we could. I don't know, have some kind of pre-sleep routine. Humans do that sometimes when they're having trouble sleeping. Share stories, talk about the day, that sort of thing. Lyraliai's ears twitched slightly, which Ethan had learned was the Etherean equivalent of raised eyebrows. You're suggesting a structured social interaction designed to promote rest? I'm suggesting we just talk until we're tired enough to sleep. No structure required. Maybe you could tell me about these quantum poetry dimensions, and I could explain why humans think it's funny when other humans fall down in unexpected ways. Physical comedy is based on the subversion of gravitational expectations. See? You're already getting it. For a moment, Lyraliai looked like she was going to say something, but then her comm implant chimed with an incoming priority message. Her expression immediately shifted to what Ethan had started thinking of as her royal business face. Excuse me, Dr. Reeves. I have matters of state to attend to. She moved to the communication alcove and activated a privacy field that turned her into a vaguely humanoid shimmer of light and muted sound. Ethan couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see enough of her body language to know that whatever matters of state were being discussed, they weren't going well. When the privacy field deactivated 20 minutes later, Lyraliai's expression was carefully neutral in the way that suggested she was working very hard to keep it that way. Everything all right? Ethan asked. Political complexities. Nothing that concerns our current arrangement. Lyraliai. Yes. We've been living together for 3 weeks. I can tell when something's bothering you. Your left ear does this little twitch thing when you're stressed. She reached up unconsciously to touch her ear, then caught herself. You've been observing my involuntary stress responses. It's what linguists do. We notice patterns in communication, including nonverbal ones. He moved closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. What's going on? The Etherean Council is concerned about the length of these negotiations. Some members feel that extended contact with human culture might compromise my objectivity. Ah. Ethan felt something sink in his stomach. They want you to maintain professional distance. Something like that. And our living arrangement probably doesn't look very professionally distant. No, it does not. They stood in silence for a moment, the comfortable ease of the past few weeks suddenly feeling fragile. So what happens now? Ethan asked. Now I attend the daily diplomatic briefing and pretend that I have not become inexplicably fond of human breakfast conversation and terrible television programs. And tonight? Lyraliai met his eyes, and there was something in her expression that made his heart do interesting things. Tonight, Dr. Reeves, I believe I would very much like to hear about quantum poetry dimensions and the physics of physical comedy. It's a date. I mean, it's a structured social interaction designed to promote rest. Of course. Nothing more. But the way she smiled when she said it suggested that they both knew it was considerably more than that, diplomatic complications or not. Ethan woke up to the sound of alarms and the distinct feeling that the universe had decided to play a particularly elaborate practical joke on him. The Concordia's emergency lighting had activated, bathing their quarters in pulsing red that made everything look like the inside of a very large, very concerned heart. Arya, he called out, sitting up in his thermal regulation pod, what's the situation? Temporal anomaly detected. The AI responded with the kind of calm that suggested either everything was fine or everything was so catastrophically wrong that panic would be counterproductive. All crew and diplomatic personnel are to remain in quarters until further notice. Lyraliai was already awake and standing at the viewport, her sleeping attire somehow managing to look both practical and elegant in a way that defied several laws of physics. Dr. Reeves, are you familiar with chronoton cascade events? I'm familiar with the words chronoton and cascade, but putting them together sounds like the kind of thing that makes theoretical physicists wake up in cold sweats. An apt description. We appear to be caught in a temporal distortion field. She turned to face him, and in the red emergency lighting, her pointed ears cast interesting shadows. The good news is that we're not in immediate physical danger. The problematic news is that we may be experiencing the same day repeatedly until the anomaly resolves itself. Ethan blinked several times, hoping that would somehow make the situation make more sense. We're stuck in a time loop. A more accurate description would be a localized temporal recursion, but yes, that's essentially correct. How many times have we had this conversation? This is the first iteration. I retain memories across temporal boundaries due to Ethereum neural architecture. You, however, will likely reset with each cycle. So every day, I'm going to wake up with no memory of the previous loops, and you're going to have to explain this all over again. That is the most probable scenario, yes. Ethan flopped back down in his pod. That sounds like psychological torture for you. I've experienced worse. Though I admit, explaining temporal mechanics to someone who once described quantum entanglement as spooky particle friendship may prove challenging. Hey, that's a perfectly valid description of quantum entanglement. Before Lyralii could respond, the ship shuddered slightly, and Ethan felt a strange sensation, like someone had just rearranged all the atoms in his body and put them back in mostly the right order. Was that the temporal reset? Yes. In approximately 12 seconds, you'll wake up to emergency alarms with no memory of this conversation. Wait, if you remember everything, can't you just tell me how to fix this? I don't know how to fix it yet. That's what we'll need to figure out together, repeatedly, until we find a solution. The sensation intensified, and the last thing Ethan heard was Lyralii saying, "Try to trust me quickly tomorrow. We'll need all the time we can get." Ethan woke up to the sound of alarms and the distinct feeling that he'd forgotten something important, like leaving the stove on or the fate of the universe. The emergency lighting was doing its dramatic red pulse thing, and Lyralii was standing at the viewport looking like she'd been expecting this exact scenario. "Dr. Reeves," she said without turning around, "how quickly can you accept the concept that we're trapped in a temporal loop and I need your help to escape it?" That's weirdly specific. How did you? This is iteration number 47. You usually take between 3 and 12 minutes to fully accept the situation, depending on how much coffee you've had and whether you've recently watched any science fiction entertainment. Ethan sat up slowly. 47 times. 47 times you've woken up to alarms. 47 times I've explained temporal mechanics. 47 times you've made a joke about quantum entanglement being spooky particle friendship, which, while amusing, doesn't help us escape this recursion. I make the same joke every time. You're remarkably consistent in your humor patterns. Also, you always ask if this is psychological torture for me around minute 4 of the explanation. Is it psychological torture for you? There's minute 4, right on schedule. Lyralii finally turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that suggested she was finding this situation less amusing than her tone indicated. To answer your question, it's becoming increasingly frustrating, yes. Okay, skipping the disbelief phase. What do we know about how to fix this? The temporal distortion appears to be centered around a quantum resonance cascade in the ship's exotic matter core. However, accessing the core requires both Ethereum quantum intuition and human pattern recognition skills. Translation: we need to work together to solve this. Precisely. The challenge is that you need to learn enough quantum mechanics in the span of a single day to assist with calculations that typically require years of study. Ethan climbed out of his thermal pod and immediately started pacing, which apparently was also consistent behavior because Lyralii didn't look surprised. How much time do we have in each loop? Approximately 18 hours and 37 minutes from reset to reset. And in 47 attempts, how close have we gotten to solving this? We've successfully identified the problem, developed a theoretical solution, and failed catastrophically at implementation 46 times. On iteration 12, we accidentally created a small black hole in the ship's recreational facility. That sounds bad. The ping-pong tables were completely destroyed. It was tragic. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her. Did you just make a joke? 47 repetitions of the same day have had an unusual effect on my humor development. I've been experimenting with what you call timing. And how's that working out for you? You laughed during iteration 32 when I mentioned the ping-pong tables, so I'm calling it a qualified success. This is so weird. You're basically living through 47 different versions of the same conversation with me, watching me react the same way over and over. Not exactly the same. Iteration 23, you tried to solve the problem by percussive maintenance on the quantum computer. Iteration 38, you attempted to negotiate with the temporal anomaly as if it were a sentient being. Did that work? The anomaly did not respond to your diplomatic overtures. However, your attempt to offer it a cultural exchange program was quite creative. I offered a time loop a cultural exchange program. You were very thorough. Included a complete presentation on human art, music, and cuisine. I was impressed by your preparation, even if it was ultimately futile. Ethan sat down heavily in one of the Earth-style chairs. Lyralii, can I ask you something? Of course. In all these loops, all these conversations we've had, have you learned anything about me that I don't remember learning about myself? Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than usual. You talk in your sleep about your father's greenhouse. You have an irrational fear of butterflies but find moths fascinating. You sing human folk songs when you think no one is listening, and you have a remarkable talent for finding hope in impossible situations. I sing folk songs. Iteration 19, you serenaded the quantum computer with something called Country Roads. It was, surprisingly effective at stabilizing the temporal matrix. My singing stabilized a temporal matrix. Human creativity appears to have unexpected effects on exotic matter configurations. We've been focusing too heavily on mathematical solutions when we might need to approach this from an artistic perspective. Ethan felt something click in his mind, the same sensation he'd experienced when Lyralii had admitted she slept better with him around. What if the solution isn't purely technical? What if breaking the loop requires something that combines human intuition with Ethereum quantum mechanics? Continue that thought. You said I sang to the quantum computer and it responded. What if the temporal anomaly isn't just a malfunction? What if it's some kind of naturally occurring phenomenon that responds to conscious interaction? Lyralii's ears twitched in what Ethan now recognized as her equivalent of excitement. A quantum consciousness event. The anomaly could be a manifestation of spacetime trying to communicate. And we've been trying to fix it instead of trying to understand what it wants. Dar. Reeves, that is either the most brilliant insight you've had in 47 iterations, or we're about to create something significantly worse than a black hole in the recreational facility. Well, when you put it like that, how can we not try? Lyralii smiled, and for the first time since he'd woken up, she looked genuinely hopeful. I believe, Dr. Reeves, that iteration 48 might be our most interesting yet. Great. Now, before we go commune with a temporal anomaly, can you teach me how to sing to exotic matter without accidentally destroying the universe? I'll do my best. Though I should warn you, your version of Country Roads has some very creative interpretations of traditional Earth geography. Looking forward to finding out what I've been doing to poor West Virginia. The temporal anomaly, as it turned out, had excellent taste in human folk music and a surprising appreciation for Ethereum quantum poetry. What had taken 48 iterations to discover was that the phenomenon wasn't a malfunction at all, but rather spacetime itself attempting to compose what could only be described as a cosmic duet. After Ethan had sung his questionable version of Country Roads, while Lyralii recited 17-dimensional mathematical poetry, the universe had basically applauded and released them from the temporal loop with what felt suspiciously like cosmic satisfaction. Now, 3 days later, Ethan found himself sitting in the Concordia's most formal conference room, surrounded by diplomatic officials from both species who looked like they were trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces and possibly involved explosives. The puzzle, unfortunately, was him and Lyralii. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," said Ambassador Chen, the head of the human diplomatic mission, while consulting what appeared to be 17 different legal documents simultaneously. "Her Majesty Queen Lyralii of the Aetherian Empire has formally requested political asylum aboard a human vessel, citing the need for extended cultural research with Dr. Reeves as her primary subject of study." "That is correct," Lyralii replied, her voice carrying the kind of royal authority that made even seasoned diplomats sit up straighter. She was wearing what Ethan had learned was her formal political manipulation outfit, which somehow made her look both devastatingly beautiful and capable of overthrowing small governments before lunch. "And this cultural research requires you to continue sharing living quarters with Dr. Reeves?" "Absolutely essential. Human behavioral patterns can only be properly studied through extended cohabitation and observation of daily routines. For scientific purposes, naturally." Ethan tried very hard not to smile at the way Lyralii delivered "naturally," with the kind of straight face that suggested she was either completely serious or the best actress in 17 star systems. "Dr. Reeves," said Counselor Kethvar, Lyralii's somewhat frazzled Aetherian liaison, "you understand that harboring a member of Aetherian royalty who has requested asylum could be considered an act of significant diplomatic import." "I understand that it's complicated," Ethan replied, which was his standard response to most political situations and had served him surprisingly well throughout his career. "But I also understand that Her Majesty's research has already led to breakthroughs in human-Aetherian cooperation. I mean, we just successfully communicated with a temporal anomaly using a combination of folk music and quantum mathematics. That has to count for something." "You serenaded spacetime itself," Ambassador Chen said, consulting another document. "And apparently spacetime enjoyed it enough to stop trapping us in a temporal loop." "When you put it like that, it sounds much more impressive than it felt at the time." "Dr. Reeves," Lyralii interjected, "I believe you're being unnecessarily modest. Your innovative approach to quantum consciousness interaction represents a fundamental breakthrough in our understanding of how organic intuition can interface with cosmic phenomena." Translation: I sang to the universe and it sang back. An elegant summary. Counselor Kethvar made a sound that suggested he was developing a migraine. "Your Majesty, with respect, your request for asylum has created what your human colleagues might call a situation. The Aetherian Council is demanding your immediate return, while simultaneously acknowledging that your cultural research has produced unprecedented diplomatic results." "Which is why," Lyralii said, standing with the kind of fluid grace that made everyone else in the room suddenly aware that they were in the presence of someone who could probably conquer solar systems if she put her mind to it, "I propose a solution that serves both diplomatic and scientific interests." She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the conference table with what appeared to be an organizational chart crossed with a mathematical proof and possibly a recipe for something involving quantum mechanics. "I present the Concordia Accords, a formal framework for establishing the first permanent human-Aetherian cultural exchange institute. Dr. Reeves and I would serve as co-directors, conducting ongoing research into interspecies cooperation, communication, and compatibility." "Compatibility?" Ambassador Chen asked, raising an eyebrow. "Cultural compatibility," Lyralii clarified smoothly. "The study of how different species can successfully cohabitate and collaborate in shared spaces. And this would require you to continue sharing quarters with Dr. Reeves. Ongoing research demands consistent environmental controls and continuous observational data. Separating the research subjects would compromise the scientific integrity of the project." Ethan watched this diplomatic dance with growing appreciation for exactly how skilled Lyralii was at getting what she wanted while making it sound like she was doing everyone else a favor. "Are you basically turning our living arrangement into an official diplomatic institution?" "I'm turning our living arrangement into a foundation for unprecedented interspecies cooperation," she corrected. "The fact that this also allows us to continue our current domestic configuration is merely a beneficial side effect." Domestic configuration. Shared thermal regulation, combined meal preparation, synchronized sleep cycles, and recreational activity coordination. You mean being roommates? I mean establishing the first successful human Etherian household unit in recorded history. The room fell silent for a moment while everyone processed this. Finally, Ambassador Chen cleared his throat. Your Majesty, are you proposing to domesticate interspecies relations? I'm proposing to demonstrate that humans and Etherians can not only coexist but thrive in shared environments, potentially paving the way for expanded cooperation in trade, technology exchange, and mutual defense agreements. Counselor Kethvar consulted his own set of documents, which appeared to be written in a script that moved around on the page when no one was looking directly at it. The political ramifications of such an arrangement would be significant. The political ramifications of ignoring successful interspecies cooperation would be considerably more significant, Lyralii replied. Particularly given that Dr. Reeves and I have already proven that human intuition and Etherian quantum mechanics can solve problems that neither species could address independently. We did save everyone from being stuck in a time loop forever, Ethan added helpfully. That is a compelling point, Ambassador Chen admitted. And the research applications could be invaluable. Plus, Ethan continued, warming to the theme, think about it from a practical standpoint. We're already successfully sharing living space, we've developed effective communication protocols, and we've established compatible daily routines. We're basically a proof of concept for everything this institute would be trying to achieve. Dr. Reeves raises an excellent point, Lyralii said, and the way she smiled at him made him momentarily forget that they were in the middle of a diplomatic negotiation that could affect the relationship between two entire civilizations. We have successfully integrated human and Etherian living patterns, dietary preferences, sleep cycles, and recreational activities. Recreational activities? Counselor Kethvar asked. Dr. Reeves has introduced me to the concept of binge-watching human entertainment programs, Lyralii explained seriously. It's a fascinating study in serialized narrative consumption patterns and their effect on interpersonal bonding. You've been watching TV together, Ambassador Chen translated. We've been conducting cultural immersion research through shared media consumption, Lyralii corrected. And I've been teaching Dr. Reeves the fundamentals of quantum poetry, which has significantly improved his understanding of Etherian cognitive processes. She taught me how to think in 17 dimensions, Ethan said. It's surprisingly useful for solving linguistic puzzles. Ambassador Chen and Counselor Kethvar exchanged a look that suggested they were both coming to the same conclusion. Very well, Ambassador Chen said finally. I'll recommend that the Human Diplomatic Corps approve the establishment of the Cultural Exchange Institute, with Dr. Reeves and Her Majesty as co-directors. And I will recommend that the Etherian Council recognize this as a formal scientific mission rather than an asylum request, Counselor Kethvar added. Though I suspect they'll be more interested in the potential for expanded cooperation agreements than the research methodology. Excellent, Lyralii said. Then we're agreed. The Institute will be headquartered aboard the Concordia, with shared facilities for human and Etherian researchers, and ongoing studies into interspecies compatibility and cooperation. And you two will continue sharing quarters for research purposes, Ambassador Chen said. For research purposes, Lyralii confirmed. Absolutely for research purposes, Ethan agreed, though he was pretty sure his grin was undermining the serious scientific tone they were going for. After the diplomats had filed out, muttering about paperwork and precedent and the complications of explaining this to their respective governments, Ethan and Lyralii found themselves alone in the conference room. So, Ethan said, we're now the co-directors of our own relationship. We're the co-directors of a groundbreaking research institute that happens to require us to maintain our current living arrangement. Right. For science. For science, Lyralii agreed, though her smile suggested she found the scientific justification as amusing as he did. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you requested asylum, was it really about the research, or was it about not wanting to go back to sleeping alone in a palace somewhere? Lyralii was quiet for a moment, and when she answered, her voice was softer than her usual royal tone. Dr. Reeves, in the past 2 months, I have experienced more genuine rest, more authentic communication, and more contentment than I have in decades of royal life. The research is scientifically valuable, but you're correct that my motivations are not entirely academic. So you basically engineered a diplomatic incident to avoid having to say goodbye. I engineered a diplomatic solution to avoid having to return to a life that no longer feels like living. Ethan felt something warm and bright expand in his chest. For what it's worth, I think the universe has excellent taste in roommates. The universe? Well, it did trap us in a time loop until we figured out how to work together to solve an impossible problem. I'm choosing to interpret that as cosmic approval of our domestic arrangement. Lyralii laughed, the genuine, unguarded sound he'd learned to treasure over their weeks together. Dr. Reeves, do you realize that you've just attributed conscious intent to the fundamental forces of space-time? Hey, if space-time can appreciate folk music and quantum poetry, it can have opinions about compatible roommates. I suppose that's as reasonable as any other explanation for how we ended up here. Besides, Ethan said, standing and offering her his arm as they prepared to return to their quarters, someone has to conduct ongoing research into whether humans and Etherians can successfully share thermal regulation systems without creating diplomatic incidents. Indeed. And that research will require extensive, long-term observation. Probably years of careful study. At minimum. As they walked through the corridors of the Concordia toward their shared quarters, Ethan reflected that 6 months ago, he'd been a xenolinguist whose biggest accomplishment was accidentally starting a war over coffee. Now he was the co-director of an interspecies research institute, had successfully serenaded the universe into releasing them from a temporal anomaly, and was returning home to shared quarters with the most remarkable woman in 17 dimensions. Lyralii? Yes. I think this might be the best diplomatic accident in the history of space travel. Dr. Reeves, I believe you may be correct. And as the door to their quarters sealed behind them, Ethan couldn't help but think that sometimes the most profound discoveries happened not in laboratories or conference rooms, but in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, when two people from different worlds learned to find peace in shared space and synchronized breathing.